Thank you, sir. To set the stage for today's topic of discussion, may I invite Professor J. Divin.
Professor Baruah, the head and faculty members of the Department of Political Science, and my dear students. It gives me immense pleasure to be with you here, to set the ball rolling so that... Hello, sir, can you hear me now? Hello.
We can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. So, Professor Baruah, I was just setting the stage for your seminar, which is supposed to be the most important in this event. And I was just trying to tell the students, we have been frequently using the word ethnicity, and it's basically, what is this ethnicity? And of course, the students would like to know that ethnicity is a term which had come from the word ethnos in the Greek language, which basically denotes the nation or a group of people distinguishable from another group of people. So that's basically that. And ethnicity is in fact an English term which is used to denote the essence of group behavior and activity based on the shared characteristics of that group. So that's how the basic meaning of the word ethnicity is understood among the academic community. And of course, it is loosely addressed. And again, predominantly, any tribal study has been equated with ethnic studies. And one other interesting fact, of course, I'm waiting eagerly for Dr. Baruah to expose, is that of the 7 states, there are over 150 different tribes. And that means it's a very interesting place to study the tribes and perhaps ethnicity as such. And so without much ado, I would pass on the floor to Professor Baruah to explain to us the interesting aspects of the Northeast, especially the ethnicity in the Northeast. Basically, the word ethnicity is derived from the Greek word ethnos, which is basically to denote nation, as we call it in political science, the nation state, right? The nation, or basically a group of people with distinctive characteristics distinguishable from other groups. Now, what are these distinguishable characteristics? Of course, it's the debate or research in ethnicity. So it basically denotes a group of people with distinctive characteristics, which is shared among themselves. And ethnicity is an English word, and it is used to denote the essence of this group's behavior, and activity. So whatever activity this group does based on those shared characteristics, which makes them a distinguishable group, which makes them a which is a separate group by themselves, which is differentiated from other groups. Now, based on that, whenever they are behaving in a certain way, that is denoted as ethnicity. So that's basically the essence of group behavior and group activity based on those shared characteristics which makes them that group. That's what basically is ethnicity. Of course,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anyway, well, India's Northeast has been a historical and also a geographical region, in the sense that the 7 states which have been called Northeast India for quite some time are in a particular geographical area. It has a particular historical context, and the relationship with India also has historical similarities for all those states that are there in India's Northeast. As I hinted, originally there were these 7 states, excluding Sikkim, which were called Northeast India. But then the historical and the geographical region has been converted into a political region by adding the state of Sikkim to the administrative and the political geography of what you call today India's Northeast. Now, this particular area has a large number of communities. These communities are of various stock, as anthropologists would tell you, and they, of course, have their own historical, cultural, and political identities, primarily because the area was sparsely populated and the communication was very bad. Therefore, most people in times before the British administration started in India were living a life which was more or less isolated. These isolated communities, which are over 360 plus communities, as enumerated by one of our most important anthropologists, K. Suresh Singh, a former director of anthropological survey in India. He counted 366 communities in 2011. But then there are more and more identities of communities which are coming into fore in India's northeast, has converted the northeast India into a conflict zone. As was pointed out by our head of the department probably, that it has various kinds of conflicts in this region. Though the conflicts are of various kinds, yet there is one common thing that seems to unite all of them, these communities. That is, that each of these communities have been trying to assert their own identity. And the process becomes complicated because there are new and new identities which are being formed. It is not that the identity formation has come to a stagnant position. No, it is a continuous process, and there are new identities which are coming into existence. To understand that particular process, it is necessary to go into the history of the socio-economic development of the region. But before I go to that, let me point out very clearly that these identities which are there, they also have developed some ethnocentric propensities, meaning that there are feelings of superiority and contempt which prevail among these identities or communities. You know that there has been a trend world over where the communities which try to assert their identity at a particular point of time always try to glorify their past. They also claim very long traditions which would appear to them to be very, very powerful, influential kind of traditions which were conceived to be better than other traditions. This is the essential aspect of what we call ethnocentric propensities. And these particular propensities actually had led to the kind of conflicts that you see in India's northeast today. As I said, there are more than 360 identities. And if I pick up some of them, the more important among them, more known and numerically stronger or larger communities among them, I can easily show how they are engaged in various kinds of conflicts. For instance, one of the most powerful community and which has been known to the rest of the world as almost the key community of that particular region are called the Assamese in English, but I would prefer the word Ohomia, Asomia. The reason is that when you say Assamese, it can refer to anybody, whoever lives in the state of Assam. That itself is a community of kind. But then communities are of various kinds. When you refer to the people who claim themselves to be Assamese there today, who claim that the Assam is their homeland, that is a community which is a linguistic community which adheres to the language called Ohomia. They use it as their mother tongue and also as their lingua franca in the entire region. This particular community actually grew up under a particular political administration called the Ahom Kingdom. The Ahoms have come from the east to Assam long time back and had ruled that particular area for 600 years. Before coming of the Ahoms, in this area, there are various small communities and there was no uniting factor. The Ahom kings came, started patronizing a newly emerging language which was more or less Sanskritized, but which had very strong tribal influences, local indigenous tribal influences. That is the language which came to be known as the Ohomia language. When the British came in 1826 to that particular area, the Ahoms were ruling that area, which is called Brahmaputra Valley, where the Ohomia lived. Once the British came to that area and began their own administration, certain developments took place. One, of course, was introduction of Western education, along which a new religion, Christianity. Though the spread of Christianity was not very speedy at the time, the Western education spread quite fast. One must to run the kind of administration that the British wanted to start in that area, they needed people who would be literate, who would be able to read and write, and who would also be able to carry out administration according to written rules. Prior to coming of the British, that area was vastly illiterate. There's very little schooling, and this schooling was meant only for people who would help the king, the Ahom king at that time. But with the introduction of the Western education, a new group of people emerged, whom I call the educated elite. One of the characteristics of the educated elite, which eventually becomes or takes shape of an educated middle class, is that it tries to unite people through a cultural process. They emphasize culture and identity. This has been there all over the world. And because the people who lived under the Ahom kingdom, particularly privileged section among them, could take advantage of the new education, they became the ally of the British, became the friends and guides of the British in those areas, and they therefore also became hegemonic in a sense. When I say hegemonic, I actually mean people who can exercise social, political, and economic power through adoption or spreading of a particular set of values. This happened, a new elite has emerged, and this elite started influencing the British administration to a great extent. except for its colonial interest of exploiting the resources of that particular region, British did not contradict this new emerging educated elite in the day-to-day political and social affairs of the area. And because the British started in Assam and then started spreading to the other areas, particularly the hills, to capture the entire area which came under British administration later on, and because British also established the capital of Assam in Khasi Hills, in a small town in those days, a station actually originally, which became a town, and that is called Shillong. Therefore, what happened was something very unfortunate happened. That the people who were becoming hegemonic, the Ohomia middle class, Assamese-speaking middle class that emerged under the British, which was becoming hegemonic there, they started believing that the entire region is Assam. And therefore, it was homeland. This is one of the most important aspects of the process of emergence of conflict in that area. But as I was trying to explain to you, the idea of hegemony that I am using here refers to the effect of dominant forms of political and ideological practice and the social relations they produce. And as a result of the domination of the Ohomia middle class in that region, the other new middle classes that began to emerge among the other smaller communities of the region. Well, I must here explain that since there were many other communities in that region, in those communities too, as a result of the new socio-economic initiatives taken by the British, new elites were emerging. One of the most important and fast-growing elite at the time was the Khasi Jaintia elite. And on the other hand, in Brahmaputra plains, there are another communities which are becoming more and more influential, and that were the Baruahs. There are communities which have never been a part of Assam, but were brought into its fold under the British administration, like the Nagas, for instance. In those areas also, new elites began to emerge. Now, these elites, which are used to living a relatively backward life before the coming of the British, have learned to acquire skills to lead a new form of life. This is a life in which there was monetization. If you look at the history of that particular state, original state of Assam, you would notice something very interesting. That when the British came, there was no monetization there. It was such a poor economy. The other regions like the Naga inhabited areas, the Khasi Jaintia inhabited areas, the Baruah inhabited areas, and the entire Arunachal tract were far more backward than Assam itself. Ahom kingdom was the most dominant, most advanced at the time. Now, with the adoption of the new ways by this new elite, they looked also for opportunities to acquire resources to enable them to lead this new life. Since there was not much of investment in anything else, and since the area did not have a history of big land holdings in that area, Assam and all those neighboring states, 6 other neighboring states of that region, did not have big landlords when the British came. The most advanced Ahom kingdom did not have a feudal relationship or a feudal economy. It was, as Amalendu Guha called it, a semi-tribal, semi-feudal economy. And in that particular situation, this new educated elite, which knew how to read and write and could therefore help the state administration and could therefore participate in the new trade practices and business practices that were introduced by British in that particular area, particularly in Assam, Meghalaya, and to some extent in Nagaland initially, they became the most powerful. And the opportunities they were looking for were in government employment, number one. Number two, the tea industry that was started by the British, and the petty trade. Interestingly, the British were accompanied by a group of people from Bengal who became clerks to the British administration in the initial stage before the emergence of the Assamese middle class as a powerful social force. Now, these people who came from Bengal, in collaboration with the British, initially wanted to use Bengali as the official language of the British state of Assam, which I would call composite state of Assam, because it was not the original proper Assam. British brought in areas like Nagaland and Meghalaya into it, and therefore it was a new composite state created by the British. And in this new composite state of Assam, the British administration, some of their officers, and the Bengali clerks wanted to use Bengali as the language of administration and education, medium of instruction. But a language is not merely a language of communication. A language also creates opportunities for you. If the administration runs in a language which is familiar to you, then you have greater opportunities in participating in that administration. This is what has happened in Assam. Up to 1873, the Bengali clerks and a section of British officials, when they used Bengali as the medium of instruction, the Bengalis began occupying important positions in the British administration. And as a result, what happened? They were envied by the newly emerging educated elite of quote-unquote Ohomia community. This led to the first ever ethnic assertion and ethnic conflict in India's Northeast. As I call it, the mother of all conflicts in India's Northeast is the conflict between the Ohomia middle class and the Bengali middle class, which actually was a migrant middle class to Assam, which came along with the British to the Assam, to the state of Assam, and started participating in administration. It was a major conflict. The Assamese middle class started fighting for establishing their language as the medium of instruction and also as official language. And from 1826, it took them so many years, up to 1873, to be able to actually establish Ohomia as the medium of instruction and also as the official language. As I said, this is the first ever major inter-community or ethnic conflict in Northeast India. And this seems to have set a pattern there. All the communities in which new middle classes emerged, they started making use of their language as a means of capturing resources of the state, and therefore all of them started vying with each other to establish their own language as official language. And therefore, initially, though it was a conflict between the Ohomia, newly emerging Ohomia middle class, and the Bengali middle class which came along with the British and established themselves in Assam, yet once the Ohomia middle class became powerful, the other smaller communities in which new middle classes were getting formed, they started looking at the Assamese as the dominant community and started competing with them. Therefore, when you look at the ethnic politics and the identity politics of Northeast India today, you would notice something very, very interesting. That in entire area, in all states, there are two communities which are looked at with some amount of suspicion by the smaller indigenous communities. One is, of course, the Bengali, which came along with the British colonial masters, established their hegemony there, and the other, which came second to the Bengalis and became influential in that area. Therefore, if you go to any of these states, you find that the Bengalis and the Ohomia are at the receiving end today because the indigenous communities are fighting with them. But there is another thing that I need to explain here. This is that the identity politics of Northeast India cannot be understood without taking into account the fact that before 1826, there was very little communication with the communities of this area of the rest of what you call the state of India today. Indian mainland had very little communication with the communities of that region prior to 1826. Though there are references to some of these communities in the Hindu texts of the past, like Ramayana and Mahabharata, particularly Mahabharata, yet one must understand that the references were made only to people who had gone from this area. Some warrior has gone from this area and conquered parts of the India's northeast, stayed there for a little while, but came back. They never settled themselves in large numbers. There are stories of one of the Pandavas, Bhima, going to Manipur and marrying there. Arjuna going to that side, marrying there. All that happened, but you do not find any description of any Hindu empire of the rest of India going there and establishing its rule for a long period in any of these states that are there today in India's northeast. Not even Assam, which is the most Hinduized state, in Manipur, which is another Hinduized state, or Meghalaya, which is not much Hinduized, Jayantia, the Khasi areas, Baruah areas, you do not find a situation where the Hindu influences and Hindu politics became durable in those areas. And therefore what happened, when the British came, British occupied Assam, all right, and went to some of the hills. But none of these hills and their people, they could not control totally. And in fact, they were not in a position, British was not in a position to bring them into mainstream politics of the British Indian Empire. And therefore, when the quote-unquote freedom struggle started and the people in various parts of India started fighting against the British rule, that particular struggle did not find very big support in the hill areas of India's northeast. In fact, the situation was such that when India was about to be independent, many of these communities were planning to join something called a crown colony. They did not want to become part of Indian Republic. And it took an important Assamese leader called Gopinath Bordoloi, who went round, persuaded people and convinced them that the state of India was not going to interfere with their life, with their culture, and it will only help them promote their own interests if they become part of India. It was Bordoloi's persuasion which seems to convince some of these communities to become part of India. And though, therefore, politically they became part of India, one must remember that this was not very smooth. I have told you that they wanted to join something called a crown colony. But there are others who were out and out opposed to the idea of joining India. They said, we have never been ruled by the Indian people and will not become a part of India. One of the most powerful group which claimed that were the Nagas, the various tribes which are called Nagas in the area now called Nagaland, and also parts of Manipur. Nagas decided not to join India. And then it took a Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi to promise to them that you try it out. This is something very interesting. Gandhi told them, you try out this state of India. They are not going to harm you. And if you agree that it is not harmful to you, then only you should continue to be with India. That gave them the idea that probably there will be some kind of a referendum after some time. And the Nagas will be able to decide whether they wanted to be with India or not. Something very interesting. Akbar Haidari was the governor at that time. He encouraged this process. And in fact, some Nagas have been claiming with some amount of official documentation that Haidari actually misled them, gave them the impression as if there will be some kind of a referendum after some time. No referendum took place. The state of India decided that Nagaland will be a part of India. To make you understand the situation there, let me look at the history of another major conflict there. Naga conflict, of course, is well known all over the country and in the rest, in a large part of the world also. It was the first ever insurgency in India's northeast against the state of India. Within the Naga society, again, a Western educated elite was emerging. As Udayan Mishra, one of the scholars, experts who have specialized in the study of Naga national assertion, has pointed out that it is the Christian Western education which seems to have led to the formation of the first ever socio-political organization of Nagaland of the modern kind, Naga Club. And from there you will see the idea of the Naga identity taking shape. In the case of Mizoram, it was something very interesting, that it was such an area to which it is very difficult to go. Only a few British officers and small groups of British army had gone there. Some missionaries started going there. No civilian population had gone there in a big way during the British period from outside Mizoram to run the affairs of that state. The Mizos, to be very frank, did not have any idea of what the rest of India was. In fact, in a very interesting book, a colonel who served in Mizoram during that period had written in a book called The Country Where the Bamboo Flowered that the day before the Indian independence on 14th of August, when he was trying to collect the Miju chiefs for a celebration of Indian independence, the chiefs were asking him what this India was about. They actually did not understand what this India was about. Therefore, it was not possible to, and there was no Congress-led anti-British movement, what you call the national freedom struggle, that was not taking place in Mizoram at all. It was not much there in Nagaland too, but Nagaland at least there were one or two like Rani Gaideru who were participating in this. But Mizoram, this kind of new Indian national politics was completely alien. They did not understand. What I'm trying to point out here is that there were communities which are unfamiliar with India. There were communities which are not part of India, and most of them actually, like the Nagas and the Mijus and the others, also small communities there, were led to believe that they will voluntarily join India, and it is their voluntary acceptance of the state of India that will bind them with India. That actually did not happen. Once it came into existence, the state of India decided to protect its own interest. Now, if you look at the situation there by, say, by 1960s, you find something very interesting. That these communities, though they were different from each other, were beginning to locate, and this I primarily believe that had happened because of the experiences that the Naga people had with the state of India, that the state of India was something which needed to be looked at very cautiously. That state of India is the state which wants them to be equal partners, but it's also a state which is willing to impose its rule in that area. And in this emergence of this feeling among the communities of that area, the Nagas played a role, all right, as an insurgent group, but the most dominant newly emerging social force that I had referred to, the Ohomia middle class, played a crucial role. Because it was one of the most educationally advanced, culturally advanced, and also economically advanced group in the area. Compared to other groups in that area, the particular middle class was very, very influential, very powerful. And it is they among whom, for the first time, a consciousness emerged that the state of India was trying to exploit the resources of this region almost in an internal colonial fashion. Not an external colony, but an internal colonial fashion. Some of us had made this point in 1980s. People like Tilottama Mishra and myself, we had written extensively about the fact that there was a consciousness among people there that their resources were being exploited by the state of India almost like a colonial power. In fact, I myself have shown in 1986, that so far as the government of jobs are concerned, where so far as the private sector jobs were concerned, so far as the other public sector opportunities were concerned, the people, the indigenous people of Assam and India are not being deprived in a very systematic manner. I had pointed out that they had reasons to be angry. The name of the paper was Elites in a Colonial Hinterland, in which I tried to explain this. But this is not true only of the Ohomia. It is true of the other smaller communities of this region also. And all of them were looking at the state of India with suspicion, because if you look at it, despite the fact that natural resources were abundant in that region, no industries were come up. except whatever the British started in the form of tea agriculture, tea industry as they called it. There's no other big industry which is taking place, no process of industrialization that started in that area. Oil was produced in Assam, and Assam had only a very small refinery in Digboi established by the British. Then the oil from Assam were being carried to places like Mathura and Barauni to establish refineries. And the abundant forest resources of the region were also being taken away. Coal was another natural resource which was being used. Initially not there. Initially it was taken away to cater to the needs of the most important metropolitan areas of the state of India. British started that particular process and the state of India continued. And this led to a suspicion in the mind of the people there. And these people, each community was in this particular emergence of this particular consciousness was led by their own educated middle classes. So much so that the insurgency that started in Nagaland began spreading to other areas. Assam, as I told you, was the most Hinduized of these states there, and yet even in Assam, by 80s, you have seen an insurgency shaping up. Well, the internal colonization process, if you try to understand it, you would notice that all over the world, internal colonization is a process which exploits indigenous communities by a more dominant community within the country, not only in economic terms, but also the dominant community seek to subjugate the indigenous small communities in cultural terms, cultural domination. And there, in that again, there is a competition for establishing hegemony in the areas which are called generally peripheries, areas which are far-flung and which are sought to be controlled by the mainstream dominant political forces. And therefore, what I am trying to explain is that since there were many cultural communities there, and introduction of Western education has developed educated middle classes in these particular communities, and these classes started realizing that the homeland of their communities and the resources of the homeland of their communities are being exploited for the purpose of catering to the needs of others by the state of India. There is a great amount of anger against the state of India. And this anger actually connected to the idea of protecting their identities as communities, cultural communities. This is something one must remember. These identities or cultural communities are also referred to as ethnic identities. One must remember that they are referred to as ethnic identities. I'll quickly explain something. All of you, many of you must, even if not all of you, must be familiar with what Paul Brass has written about the emergence of nationalism in India. There he told us something very interesting. He said that in all over this developing world, you can see that there are three clear stages of development of communities before they arrive at the stage of nationality as an identity. In the modern world, national identity has become an important political force. There is no doubt about it. And Brass tells us that originally actually every group which identifies itself as a cultural group actually begins its life in this process of development only as an ethnic community. And I need to explain that the ethnic community originally is an ethnic group, which is different from other culturally. But then, once that particular group which lives an originally an isolated life, like in many sparsely populated areas of the world, it starts interacting with others and realizes its differences with others. There is a sense of community that is formed within them. And from the stage of ethnic group, it becomes a community. A community has rules, norms, values that bind them together. And once these such communities start claiming that they have a homeland and a right to a homeland, then they actually acquire the characteristic of a nationality. In India's Northeast, the identities which are there are such who have crossed the age of ethnic groups have become communities, and many of them have entered the stage of nationalities. Look at the communities like the Khasi, the Garu, the Boru, of course the Oromia, the Karvi, the Dimasa, and now even the Missings, and Nagas, the Mizos. All these communities are now claiming that they are a nationality by their own right. That they are nationalities in their own right. And therefore, each nationality, of course, will demand that they have a homeland of their own. So this or entire stage of nationalities now are competing with each other to establish hegemony in India's Northeast, and at the same time is competing with the state of India for managing resources. But there are certain things which I need to quickly mention here before I conclude, is that ever since the new politics of Hindutva had started in India with the establishment of this particular BJP government in 2014, when it became powerful, the Hindutva politics, there is also a process of centralization of political power in the state of India. The federal structure that was there established by the Constitution of India seems to be weakened every day here. And therefore, what is happening? The resources of the indigenous people of the peripheries, like India's Northeast, are being taken away increasingly by the centrally powerful forces, as I call them, the centripetal forces of the Indian polity. The new enactments which were there, which have been there, it began in 1990s, but are becoming more and more powerful now. The laws, like for instance, the laws over the control of water. You are trying to use the natural resource called water of these particular regions for the benefit of the rest of the country. This is happening through the new laws that you are making. Now, the environment law that they have passed recently, the forest resources are sought to be completely destroyed in the interest of the central forces which are patronized by the big corporate world. The big industrial groups, without caring for maintaining the environmental health of the region, are being allowed now increasingly to establish industries there. They have been given licenses, though the work has not started. I believe this will increase the conflict between the state of India and the identities that that are emerging in India's northeast, or newly emerging nationalities of India's northeast. The communities which are becoming nationalities would seriously fight the state of India over control of resources of their area. On the other hand, the conflicts over land, job opportunities, and petty trade, and the question of cultural identities will also increase the conflict among the identities which are there already. The communities which are there in that region, among them also serious conflicts will occur. It is already there, but it will become more serious. Elites of various communities compete for hegemony. And as I tried to explain, indicated before, hegemony refers to the values and the privileged norms that are spread through social discourses. Various discourses take place in society. Through those discourses, important values, certain set of values are given more importance than others. And through those values, the social power is exercised. As Robert Gray has pointed out, that hegemony is the effects of dominant forms of political and ideological practice and the social relations they produce. To understand the identities of India's northeast and their politics, it is important to understand that each of these communities are trying to compete with each other on the one hand, and also compete with the dominant forces of Indian nation state for establishing hegemony in their societies. So this is the situation as of today. It's a very complex, big situation. I'm sorry I could not go into each of the states to explain their situation, but the slides that I have given indicates how hegemony is established by the middle classes there, and what is the result of competing hegemonies there. I propose also to send a series of other slides by tomorrow, which will explain in fact the economic essence of these competitions. Well, with that I'll conclude. I'm sorry. Initially there was a lot of hiccups about it, which created a problem for me. And I got a little, to be very frank, I got a little disorganized because I didn't expect that this kind of connectivity problem would emerge. Anyway, I don't know how much time I have taken. I seem to have taken a lot of time. But if you have the patience, I would still answer questions if you have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the very enlightening lecture on ethnicity and middle-class politics in Northeast India. The floor is now open for questions. Kindly ensure that your microphones and webcams are on while you ask your questions. You can also make use of the chat box option to ask your questions.
So to start the discussion, sir, may I ask one question? When you pointed about the centripetal forces that are playing an important role in terms of bringing in the politics towards the center, what happened in Kashmir? The removal or the abrogation of 370. Do you think that Article 371A to H of the Indian Constitution would also be facing a similar action by the central government, by the present regime? And if so, what would be the consequences to that action by the central government?
Well, friends, this is a very important question. There are many who would hesitate to answer this kind of question. I am not one of them. I'll tell you very frankly what I see as political scientist, irrespective of the consequences that can follow. because I am a person who speaks out my own mind. See, the kind of action that the government of India has taken in the case of Kashmir, it is not possible to be taken in the case of India. Kashmir situation was slightly different from even the Nagas, Nagaland, where there is an insurgency. You know that Kashmir was a Muslim state and a Hindutva. It is easy for a Hindutva politics to paint a picture of Muslims being not friends of Hindus. And they would say Hindus are equivalent to Indians. This is the message this government has. Then, despite its own mistake, the point is there's a large number of people in India who believe that they are Hindus, today at least. Now, a couple of years back, things would have been different, but today. And therefore, it is possible for the government of India to treat as someone who are not friends. They are not like us. The human beings deal with other human beings and treat them as their equal only when they see similarities with them. If you do not have similarity with them, if there are big differences, apparent big differences with despite all talk about our being civilized human beings, we often do not even put in Kashmir. The other question, of course, is Pakistan. Pakistan, there is no doubt that Pakistan has been trying to create trouble in the part of the Kashmir, and therefore, of course, it is possible for State of India to make use of these two, do what it did in Kashmir. In the case of Nagaland, the point is that government of India consciously accepted the situation that a special opportunity, a special privileges constitutionally will be granted to Nagaland. And if you look at the rest of the big tribal states there, it is not possible for the government of India to take away what they have given. 6 schedules, for instance, is an advantage which was given to them. And this was given to people who were at that time fiercely opposed to the idea of joining India. Now I don't think it will be possible because you do not have a river like Pakistan to be used in India's northeast. You cannot use even China as a river in India's northeast. China has been claiming Arunachal Pradesh, but you cannot paint the Arunachalis as friends of the Chinese. Therefore, it is not possible for the government of India to do what in India's northeast, what they did in Kashmir. And if they ever it, I tell you, then it will probably lose that part of India. It will not be possible for the state of India to retain it. One must remember that. Yes? Paddy, Paddy, do you have a supplementary to that?
I get your point, sir. So I'm happy that this kind of action would not be taken against the northeastern states.
See, there are other things they might try to do. Infiltrate the area in a manner so that the indigenous people become minorities there. Then yes, it might be possible. But such a resistance has started already against the Constitutional Amendment Bill, Citizenship Amendment Bill, that government of India, despite going ahead with it, has not been able to implement what it wanted to implement. It said it will give citizenship to Bangladeshis who came even after 1978. But you look at the situation today, they formally say this, they have not been able to do anything there. So that resistance will build, and therefore they will not be able to do what it had done Kashmir. Yeah. Any other question?
Sir, so this is Ruchita from second MA.
Hello.
Yeah. So, sir, recently the NSCN, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, they are having a mistrust against interlocutor R.N. Ravi. So they are like of demanding the separate flag or the constitution for their land, but on the other side, the national political group which is supporting the interlocutor. So can we say the groups in Nagaland itself are divided, or we can say the political party like BJP is dividing them on their stance?
My friend, it is not only BJP, even Congress did that. See, it's only natural that a state will try to divide opponents. Now, the Naga insurgents were opponents of the Indian state. They were fighting them. And therefore, you cannot expect that the state of India will not try to divide them. State of India tried to divide them by encouraging certain groups within the NSCN from the initial stage. Some of them were won over by State of India, but there is something very interesting that happens in Nagaland. One must remember this. It's an important learning lesson. There's an important lesson to be learned by State of India. See, Ravi was initially considered a friend of Nagaland, but then, because he failed to deliver what he promised them indirectly, he told them that certain guarantees will come to you, and therefore, let us have truce, let us enter into some kind of a treaty or accord. But what happened was, Nagaland had a history. This is not the first time an accord was sought. How do you remember? There was something called Shillong Accord, and it was not intended. And you make use of the State of India has always been using these accords to get a foothold among the insurgents or their opponents and try to divide them with the help of that. They are playing the same game along with the Baruahs now. They are trying to divide them with the help of an accord. So this is a part of the politics of the State of India, which believes that those who are opposed to it must be fought seriously politically, and therefore they need to be weakened. And to weaken them, the most important thing is to divide them. So encourage some of them, a section of the Naga underground had come, joined the mainstream politics, and became ministers, even chief minister in Nagaland. But that did not end the Naga insurgency. While a section got tired, joined the mainstream, became part of the new parliamentary politics, the other younger Naga people went and joined insurgency. The insurgency continues. So this definitely is an attempt. There are certain differences in all political processes. There will be differences in all political groups. There will be differences. You cannot say there will be unanimity in any political group, but those differences are sought to be exploited by the State of India, because it is in State of India's interest that they exploit that, create differences, make them serious, and weaken their enemy. That is only expected. This is Machiavellian politics.
So, if that is the case, sir, may I also ask, do you think that the insurgent groups, since leadership, in the context of leadership, do you think that there are no possible successors to these leaders who are present with these organizations? Now, when we take the example of the Assam insurgent leader who was arrested recently, do you think that there are successors? And if there are no successors, do you think that the conflict or the insurgency in Northeast is waning weak? How do you see this?
I understand your question. See, first thing one must remember, that whether it is in insurgent politics or politics of agitation, there is no leadership like the dynastic leadership. The movement itself shows up leaders. For instance, in the days of Fizu, when he was at the helm of affairs in Nagaland, where was Kaplan? See, this is what happens. New leaders will emerge if the movement remains strong at the bottom. The top leadership might get tired, and particularly in the case of insurgency, it's a very difficult thing to fight something like the state of India for a long time. Even in Assam, this is what is happening. A number of people who joined the ULFA in 1980s, late 1970s and 1980s, are now people who are about 60, 65 plus age, and they are tired. And many of them are surrendering. But at the same time, there's something very interesting, that there are new people who are going and joining them. Only about 4 months back, there were reports 600 young boys had gone and joined ULFA newly. So even if the leadership does not remain as it is today, if there is a leadership change, the movement may not completely go away unless the root causes of the movement are dealt with. If the disgruntlement that is there, the anger that is there, you do not deal with it, well, you can win over one leader. You can even kill a leader. You can kill 25 leaders. New leaders will emerge. One thing one must remember. And therefore, I do not see any end of the resistance to the state of India in India's northeast unless the state of India takes more conciliatory approach to the problems of the communities there and start really developing their socio and economic situation. If they do that, yes, they can still win over. But one of the most important thing in that, as I was trying to indicate, is to give them cultural autonomy. Give them this idea that your cultural identity will not be weakened, will not be destroyed. Yes?
Sir, there's a question in the chat from Porkadi. Professor, is there a possibility of a negotiation with each of these tribes by the government of India to incorporate them psychologically into the Republic of India and offer an inclusiveness that has hitherto been denied?
Yeah. See, that will depend on the government of India. And the government of India, the intentions of government of India, who is dependent on what? What kind of political forces control the government of India? If the Hindutva political forces continues to control the government of India, I do not see any possibility of reconciliation or any policy of any possibility of inclusiveness. Because you know and I know, they have declared long back that their actual game is establishment of a Hindu Rashtra, which means that they will not tolerate the other identities within that Rashtra. There is a hegemonic effort at hegemonic domination. If you look at the way things are happening in the case of education particularly and culture, you notice that the Hindutva politics believes in subjugating all other communities, and they are saying that there should be one education system in India, there should be one culture in India, and India should be one. But unfortunately for them, India is not just one. India is politically one, all right. India is culturally varied. India is culturally so varied that it is impossible for it to think of a one nation state. And that is why I don't think if this politics continues, if there is no change of equations of political power in parliament and inclusive politics in India's northeast to be offered by the government of India, I don't think that is possible, and therefore there will be no reconciliation with them.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I should add, I am not saying that the Congress should do it. I am not saying the Congress should do it. It is not that I am only against BJP. I am telling you that any political power in government of India, political party in government of India, which wants to streamline and make India one cultural unity, one national unity, well, they will not be able to do this. They will not be able to come to an understanding with those small tribes of India's northeast, not only the tribes, even the non-tribal populations of India's northeast, who do not have a very long historical tie with the state of India, with the culture of India. Yeah.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for answering our questions. As we near the end of the session, I call upon Anjali K. Bijoy of 3rd BA Political Science to propose the vote of thanks.
A very good afternoon to one and all. First and foremost, I thank God Almighty for making today's program a great success. On behalf of the Department of Political Science, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Apurba Kumar Baruah for sharing his insights on ethnicity and middle class politics in Northeast India. And lastly, my heartfelt thanks to our faculty and my fellow students of the department. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, sir. Very kind of you. Thank you so much. You have benefited. I think our students have been benefited with your talk. It was very, India Northeast politics have not been discussed properly. So this will give them a clear understanding of what Northeast politics is all about. So thank you so much for your talk, sir. I think we'll have more sessions in future because we have I think one of the
largest to have listened to me.
population next to Kerala state is Northeast students in our college. So I think it would have benefited a lot. Why these students are studying here? What is the ethnic problem behind the whole thing? Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye.